there, and welcome back to 355 Code. Today we will be working on another game. Today's game will be Chinese checkers, but it's also a lot of functionality that will be relevant for any kind of checkers game or checker-like game. And we won't be creating the entire game. We'll be focusing on some of the functionality of the pieces as well as some of the logic in the second video of this series. So let's dive right into it. As you can see, I already have the board set up here. We won't be setting it up together, but this code will be in the description, and you can choose to either build it yourself or take a look at my code here. But basically what we've built is a pyramid shape with what I called here indents. And if you're familiar with the game of Chinese checkers, you'll have these indents where the pieces sit. And for the first 5 rows of the pyramid, we have pieces. And then for the next row, it's empty. And this is created as a function. So if you wanted, you could technically change the amount of rows here to, let's say, 8. And you'd have 8 rows. And within the create game function, I have limited it to populate the indents with pieces of only the first 6 rows. And this technically you could also change. So if this were, let's say, 7, then you'd see that it would populate another row. But just to stay loyal to the game and to give us some flexibility to play around with our board, we'll be doing 6 rows where 5 of them are populated. So let's dive right into making these pieces move around. So let's first break down our problem and think about what it is we want these pieces to do. So first of all, we want to implement a drag and drop. And this, if we break down even more, within drag and drop, that means pick up on click, move with mouse, and then return, let's say, insert into destination indent. Okay, again, these holes are, I call them indents, you can call them whatever you'd like. And one extra thing that we're going to want to do is to return to origin indent on random drop. So that means if I drop the piece, let's say anywhere on the board that isn't in another indent, then it'll automatically jump and return to its original spot. So that's a little bit of a bonus, just so that we don't leave pieces all around the board here. So let's get down and start creating this functionality. And let's create this as a function. And this function we'll just call piece functionality. Okay, and here we're going to basically add some event listeners and make our piece move around. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to detect when one of our pieces has been selected, and that basically means that we are going to need to add an event listener to the piece. And it's important also as well that we pass in a certain piece that we'll be adding the event listener to as a parameter to the function. And here we're going to add event listener, and this is going to be for mouse down event. And on mouse down, we are going to execute this function. And what is this function going to do? So basically, we're going to want to remember 2 things here. One is we're going to want to remember that we have our mouse down, and that will help us implement some drag functionality later on. And we're going to want to log which piece has now been selected. So I'm going to add 2 global variables right here up on top before we even create game. And one is going to be selected piece, and it'll start off as null. and the next one will be mouse down. And it'll start off as false, okay, because we assume that the game is not starting with the mouse down. And basically what we're going to do here is on mouse down, we are going to say that the selected piece is this piece, which is the target of the event, and that mouse down is equal to true. And we already know here that what we're going to want to do is add another event listener to the game, but this one will be outside of the piece functionality function, and this will be an event listener for the document, and we're going to basically be listening for mouse up. And when mouse comes up, we are going to want to change our mouse down variable to false. Okay, and this is going to be important for us later on to do some drag and drop effects. So now what we want to do is to basically drag the piece, because at the moment nothing is going to happen. If we run our code and we click on pieces, nothing's going to happen. We could console, let's say console.log mouse down, okay? So you'll see that nothing is happening, and the reason that is because we didn't really call our function. And we're going to want to call these functions when we are creating the pieces, because basically this function is primarily for adding event listeners. So we create the pieces up here in the populate indent function, which I had given to you in advance. And so right after we append these pieces here, we can actually just call the piece functionality. And we could also do it before that. And now let's try and run our code, and you'll see that when I click on these pieces, I am getting true because mouse down is true. Okay, and if I was to add one in the other event listener, we would see false, but we don't really need to do any debugging right now, so let's move forward with our code. So the next thing we need to do is to move the piece that has been selected. And the way we're going to do that is basically just have the piece follow the mouse around. So we're going to need to add an event listener for mouse move, and that we're going to be adding to the document as well, because we want to listen for mouse movements around the entire board of our game, you can imagine. And this is for mouse move, as I said. And here we're going to be listening out for the event, and we're going to need to actually get some information from this event. So what do we need to do? First, we're going to want to change the style of the piece to position absolute. And the reason we're going to do this is so that we can just use the exact coordinates that we get from the event and tell the piece to move to those coordinates. Otherwise, everything here would be relative because we didn't really define a position for the piece when we created it. And that's fine because all it has to do is sit right here inside of the indent. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to tell the piece to move to wherever the mouse is, or wherever this mouse move event is firing. And in order to do that, we just need to change style top, and this will be equal to, and I'm going to use template literal here just because it simplifies things, and this is going to be equal to event dot client y. Okay, because top is the location on the y-axis, and here, of course, don't forget pixels. And for the style left, again, we're going to use the same thing, just with client X. Okay, and client Y and client X, that is just what the location of the event, or the coordinates of the event, are called in the event object. So that's the name that it was given. And now basically let's try running our code and see what happens. Okay, so now we see that all of our pieces have collapsed into one spot and are moving with the mouse. And that is to be expected because basically we did not limit this functionality only to the selected piece. So basically what we're going to do is say if selected piece equals to piece. Okay, so if this specific piece, if a certain piece is selected piece, then we're going to move. And our other condition is also that mouse is down. Okay, because we're going to want to, this is a drag functionality. It's not a pick up and drop functionality. And now let's try running our code again, and we'll see that when we click on one of the pieces, it lifts and drags with the mouse. Okay, it's not perfect, it's a little buggy, but in general it works. And I'm purposely leaving it uncentered for some of the later functionality that we want to implement. And that's great. Okay, so we already have a dragging piece. And next thing we want to do is to insert into a destination indent, right? Because we did pick up on click, okay? We did move with mouse, and now we just want to insert into a destination indent. So how are we going to do this? So basically we are now going to need to start listening for a mouse up event, and we want to know basically if our mouse up event happens above a certain indent, then we are going to put that piece into that indent. So this event listener will actually need to go up here where we create each of our indents. Okay, and that happens right over here. So right before this, right before we populate those indents, we are going to want to add an event listener for each indent, and this is going to be listening for mouse up, and let's think, what are we going to do when we get mouse? And so to implement this, we basically need to do two things, and it's going to be a little bit like magic. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is to remove the selected piece. Okay, we are going, and we do that using a method of element.remove. And the next thing we're going to do is we are going to add a completely new piece into the indent that fired the event listener. So to do that, we are just going to call our populate indent function, which we have written in advance. And we are going to populate the indent that fired this event listener. So that's just event.target. Okay, and let's see how this looks. So if we pick up a piece and then drop it right over here, so you'll see that the piece enters cozily into the new indent, and there is no piece in the original indent, and it's actually not the same piece as before. So we actually completely removed the original piece, and it's a new piece, but it happens so quickly that it looks like it's just the same piece popping right in there. And that's a little bit of movie magic there for you. But we still have some issues. For example, if I pick up a piece, I can still put it where a piece is already sitting, which we don't want. And if we pick up a piece and just drop it in the middle of nowhere, it's stuck in limbo. Okay, so those are two things we're going to want to deal with. So first of all, let's start with the first bug. And we'll add a condition here that we will only do this if if event dot target dot children, okay, dot length is equal to 0. Okay, and basically that means that it's not occupied already by another piece. And let's check this out. And that did not work. Okay, because we can see that it is placing the piece right over there. So let's try and figure out what our issue is. So let's console.log event.target.children.length and see what we get here. So we're getting that it is 0. So this is actually an important lesson for us when it comes to event listeners. And the reason that this is happening is that we were using the event.target for the event handler, and we actually want to do event.currentTarget. And the difference between current target and target, at least in our situation, is that if we just use event.target and our element has children, then it might use the children as the target. Because you see, if we're implementing a drag and drop, let's say, and I drop the piece right over here, then the mouse up is actually taking place on top of the piece that's within the indent. And then that piece will be the target. And in this case, it of course doesn't have any children. But if we use current target, then that means it'll always be referring to the element to which the event listener was added, which in this case is the indent. So you'll see here that cannot read the undefined children. So let's take a look and see why that is happening. Current target dot children and the target ID. And let's see. Okay, that is working. Oops. And that is not working. Okay, so you'll see that, I guess that was just a temporary bug that we had there before. So you'll see that as I pick up a piece, if I drop it in an empty spot, it immediately snaps to that spot. And if I pick up a piece and I try to put it where there already is a piece, it just kind of stands there in limbo, and that will be fixed when we implement our drag and drop, our other drop functionality for when we drop the piece outside of an indent. So another thing that you saw happening here is that, here if I click and then release, then it moves even though we didn't drag and drop. So basically, to solve that, basically what we'll want to do is return our selected piece to null whenever we have a mouse up event. And we'll want to do that whenever we have a mouse up event, so that'll be here as well. So let's do selected piece equals null. And then you'll see that we are not, we can't move pieces just by clicking and clicking elsewhere, but we are getting this console error, and that is because we'll basically want to add selected piece as a condition for our mouse up event. So here, except for this, we'll also just add here selected piece. Okay, and we can just write it just like that, and if that is true, then this will happen, otherwise it will not. And that's just our drag. And drop, drag, and drop, and drop. Okay, so that seems to be working now. And let's move on to our next thing, which is basically what happens when we drop the piece in limbo. So in order for that to work, we're going to want to basically add some more functionality to this mouse up event listener down here. Okay, and another thing we're going to want to do is basically we need to remember what the origin indent was. So let's add another global variable here, and that will be origin indent, and we'll start that off as null. And basically when we click down on a certain indent, we are going to remember that that is the origin indent. So that means we need another event listener here, and that will be indent.add event listener, mouse down, and basically when that happens, we are going to say that origin indent is equal to indent. Okay, and the next thing that we want to do is basically say that whenever if mouse up, so if mouse is up, then we will want to do the same thing that we did over here. So that will be selected piece.remove and populate indent. And in this case, the indent that we're going to be populating is the origin indent. Okay. Oops. Okay, so let's try checking out that code. And cannot read the properties of null because we have here selected piece equals null. So let's move this under so that it executes after. Let's try that again. And you can see that we have a nice bounce back functionality here. Okay, so if we try dropping our piece anywhere that it shouldn't go, and we also see that we are repopulating the origin indent no matter what. So even if I move a piece to a new place, then we are still populating the origin indent. So what we're going to want to do is to create another global variable, and that will be a current indent. Okay, so the current indent will basically be whatever indent the mouse is over at a given point. So let's say current indent, and we'll start it off as null. Okay, and then whenever we move our mouse over an indent, so we're going to need another event listener here. So indent dot add event listener, mouse over, or we could also technically use mouse enter, but let's say mouse over, and in that case, we are going to want to say that current indent is equal to indent. And we need to remember that we need to remove this current indent. We need to remove this indent from the current indent variable whenever we leave that indent. So let's have mouse leave sorry, let's do mouse out. And we'll say current indent is equal to null. Okay, so that basically means whenever we are over a certain indent, current indent will be that indent. And then if we move out of the indent, then it'll be null, unless we move on to another indent, and then it will replace it. And basically what we want to do is we only want to execute this code down here, okay, if current indent is false, okay, is null. And that basically means that we are not currently over a certain indent, and that means that we should drop back to our original spot. So let's take a look at our code again. And drop, excellent, and if we put here into a new spot, then we have replaced our piece and the original piece has disappeared. So let's take a look at what we want to do. Drag and drop, we move with mouse, we insert into a destination indent, and we return to the origin indent on a random drop. So we have basically implemented all of the functionality that we set out to do. And this is really the foundation of any kind of checker-like game where we're going to have pieces moving around from one spot to another. So if you like this video, please don't forget to give us a like, to subscribe, and be sure to check out the second video where I'll talk a little bit about the logic behind the game and how to keep track of where we're moving our pieces and where they're allowed to move and not allowed to move. So see you next time.